now move to the motion before the House this evening, which is, this House believes Thatcher was a hero for the working class. I now look to the first speaker, Adithi Shenava, Director of Press, Mansfield College, to open the case for the proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll begin by saying what an honour it is to have the opportunity to speak before this House on such a historic debate. We all agree that Margaret Thatcher changed the heart of British politics more than any other British politician since Clement Attlee. For her admirers, she is the inspiring first female Prime Minister, the first winner of 3 consecutive elections. She is sharp, she is relentless, and sleeplessly driven by a self-confident conviction to do what no one else would do. But for those opposing her, she is the wicked witch, not the saviour of this country, who sacrificed their jobs, their livelihoods, and most importantly, their dignity. And this reminds us that this debate is not about historical curiosity, but it is about the real lives of real people who still feel that they are living in a Britain shaped by the choices of Margaret Thatcher. This is about deciding whether to justify their indignation or vindicate their admirers. And that's what is at stake. This debate is about identifying whether it is right that when we think of her enemies, we conceive that they are the working classes. And when we think of her admirers, we think that they're the more privileged middle and upper classes. After all, for many, Thatcher and her legacy has come to reinforce the convention that the Conservatives are the party of the affluent and against the needs and desires of the working class people. Today, I hope to go some way to show you that this is not the case, and instead that Thatcher was not in fact the enemy of the working classes, but their hero. The crux of my argument rests on Thatcher's revolution of social attitudes, grounded in a social philosophy that spoke to the abilities of each individual, not only independent of class, but in a vision of society where the very structures of class have dissolved. My argument will rest on how this ideology underpinned first, her social and economic policy, second, her approach to trade unions, and finally, her broader life and legacy. But before I continue with my argument, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's opposition speakers. Sat across me this evening is Mahi Joshi, a close friend and a second-year PPEist at Trinity College. It's nice to see you in a seated position this evening, Mahi, given your apparent obsession with being standing position here at the Union. But in all seriousness, it's no doubt that after this many standing runs, you are definitely a determined and formidable opponent. We then have Peter Thatcher, a prominent British human rights campaigner, most known for his campaigns for LGBT social movements worldwide, and also known for being denounced by the former party leader of the Labour Party, Michael Foot, for allegedly supporting extra parliamentary action against the Thatcher government. So I'm very interested as to what this actually entails. Then we have Wayne David, the Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Armed Forces and Defence Procurement, and the former PPS to Ed Miliband. Finally, we have Ray Williams. Ray is a third-year human scientist at Wadham College and the Chief of Staff at the Oxford Union. It's been great to work with someone who is so passionate, not only about reforming this union, but also in the university as a whole. And we can only hope that Ray's current SU slate fares better than his potentially invalid slate ban. Mr. President, these are your opposition speakers, and they are most welcome. Before we engage with this debate, we must first clarify what a hero for the working class would be. When we think about a hero, our minds attend to fiction or history and conjure up images of Rosa Parks, Hercules, and possibly even our president, Daniel Wilkinson. I know it seems there's no underlying single property binding these heroes, but what Rosa Parks and Dan have in common is that they brought about positive change for a cause. Surely there is no heroic act but an overall picture that gives people optimism and opportunity, all beginning with one person. Likewise, Thatcher is a hero for the working classes because she invested in their long-term interests in order to uplift and maximise their potential. That was her cause. It was Thatcher's social philosophy that specifically underpinned this heroic narrative. She saw old class labels as pernicious and archaic. For her, the values that others labelled as middle class were in truth universal values, shared by decent people, regardless of their social background. They were the values that she was brought up with, those of hard work, self-reliance and thrift. Those she hoped she could ingrain into the national self-consciousness. Her task was to question this Marxist notion of class loyalty, which ran deep in the labour movement, the views that collective progress as the only acceptable form of advancement for the working classes. She instead sought to invoke aspiration in workers by restoring small government and free markets that would that would create conditions in which they and their families could get on. The importance of her social philosophy can be seen through the influence on her social and economic policies. The first policy I'd like to address is Right to Buy, which gave council tenants the right for the first time to buy their homes at a hefty discount. For Thatcher, council housing was a direct way in which British people were segregated by their social background, stressing class divisions in society. Right to Buy provided working class homeowners with independence and a financial asset to fall back on, as well as an opportunity for self-development in her New Britain. Figures show how the number of owner-occupiers increased by 3.2 million people in just 10 years under Thatcher. We must now move on to the most profound mark that Thatcher's office left, not only on Britain's economic landscape, but in Britain's social memory: the ending of the strong arming of the government by the trade unions. We must point out, Margaret Thatcher achieved what no one, Tory or Labour, was able to do. There's no disputing the grey reality that the opposition will put forward today. People did lose their jobs, and for the working classes, this meant losing aspects of their self-identity. But Thatcher's social philosophy was pragmatic. Sometimes we have to be cruel to be kind. The decline of the mining industry was rampant across most of the developed world, prior to Thatcher even becoming Prime Minister. The historical fact is that Britain's industry had structural problems with low investment, low productivity, which when coupled with the international competition, meant Thatcher faced a demand for severe economic restructuring. This was because Thatcher believed in her picture of the dissolution of the classes, for only a new economic structure would create the conditions necessary for us all to share in economic prosperity. Thatcher's view was validated in the consequences of her victory. She shifted away from the manufacturing industry and built a more competitive service-led economy, grown out of increasing privatisation and deregulation, which embraced her principles of enterprise, risk, and individualism. She created an economy in which we could all share in the benefits, demonstrated through policies such as being able to buy shares in previously state-owned companies, as well as allowing deregulation to help both small and medium-sized businesses. The success this has had is validated by the fact that around 40% of the skilled working class consistently voted Tory in 1979, 83 and 87. That's a larger proportion than those that voted for Labour. So the implication that Thatcher stripped the working class of dignity is a limited one. Instead, maintaining the economic situation of the 70s was meant to maintain the working class people's hindered capacity to actualise the potential that Thatcher actually recognised in them. And this brings me to my final point, Thatcher's wider life and ultimately her legacy. Her life began as Margaret Roberts, daughter of Alfred Roberts, a Grantham greengrocer. If the opposition expect that I'm going to take the deceitful angle that Thatcher was working class because her father was a greengrocer, I apologise, I am to disappoint. Thatcher was middle class. Her father had a lucrative business in a series of greengrocers. But undercutting Marxist romanticism, Margaret Thatcher overcame the background sentiment that only a working class politician could rise up for working class people. Thatcher demonstrated this further by displacing the status quo of a government of aristocracy with a government of meritocracy, by purging the cabinet of upper class, Oxbridge-educated, Etonian West, who did not share in her vision. The centre of gravity of British politics shifted to the right, as the right shifted its policies to account for the many, not the few. And this follows on to how Thatcher's economic and social philosophy is her legacy, and most clearly expressed in Blair's New Labour, which heralded an era of politics which directly aimed to uplift the working classes. It was an axiom of New Labour not to shake the foundations that she laid. Indeed, Blair's programme for the 1997 election confirmed all of Thatcher's free market reforms of a deregulated, non-planned and largely privatised economy with a flexible labour market, marginalising the trade unions while publicly disowning the traditional policies and the visions of the old left. He also introduced softer economic policy to complement the framework that she had left for him through policies such as introducing the minimum wage. But most importantly, it was the spirit of her social philosophy which has continued within British politics. Her broader message echoes into the mantras of Blair's aspirational working class, Gordon Brown's hard-working families, Miliband's strivers, and of course David Cameron's people who work hard and want to get on, thus changing the long-term prospects of the working class, which is amongst, with my other arguments, what we would be failing to appreciate in voting against the proposition this evening. Thatcher's social philosophy, defiant of her privilege, along with her pioneering economic restructuring and the historically unique defeat of the trade unions, were all in the name of the bigger picture of the working class, and are exactly what a hero of a working class would have done. Therefore, I urge you to vote for the proposition tonight. Thank you.